All right, 10th graders. Now, we talked last chapter, we were talking about Rome, both the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire. And we're jumping into what's chapter 7 in our distance learning. So, our fifth week, and that is going to be India and China establishing empires. So, while Rome is taking over the Mediterranean and much of Persia, all the way up into England and down into northern Africa, uh, that is India and China are also developing empires, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. You can see on this map here, we're going to talk about the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta Empire, and also trade routes. And you'll notice those trade routes stretching all the way across, all the way from the east over in the Mediterranean here, where they'd be in contact with the Roman Empire, and then all the way over into the west, where they would also be in contact with China. You can see some trade routes going through the sea down here as well. And that's where we're going to end. That's the Silk Road, very important. We'll talk about that shortly. So first, we're going to talk about Chandragupta Maurya, and he builds an empire. This empire will be called the Mauryan Empire. He unifies northern India, and he defeats Seleucus. Right, this is one of Alexander the Great's generals. This is in 321 before Common Era, and Chandragupta wins, claiming land in the Indus River Valley, and he builds what becomes known as the Mauryan Empire. This empire stretches for 2,000 plus miles, and it unites northern India under one ruler, and that is Chandragupta Maurya, right? And that's Chandragupta, all one word. You'll see why I'm saying that as a thing in a little bit. That's important. Chandragupta, one word. So how does he run the empire? Well, he divides it into 4 provinces. Each is headed by a royal prince, and each province is divided into local districts. You have officials imposing taxes and enforcing laws. Right? When you have huge territories, how do you deal with it? Well, you divide it up into pieces, and you spread the important decisions around to a number of different people to be in charge of those local areas. And what do we know about life in the Mauryan Empire? Well, we don't know a lot because there aren't a lot of records from that time that are still around. We do know that the capital city was very beautiful. We know that they had a large army assembled. We know that farmers were exempt from military service, which would make a lot of sense because you need to make sure that food keeps showing up or everyone's going to starve. And then heavy taxes to pay for the army and for fancy building projects. Beyond that, we don't know much about the Mauryan Empire. So, when Chandragupta dies, Asoka, his grandson, takes control of the Mauryan Empire. At first, he rules much like his grandfather, waging bloody wars to expand the empire. But after one particularly bloody war, which kills some 100,000 soldiers, he changes his mind and begins to study Buddhism, which preaches nonviolence. And he puts up these pillars with edicts or policies or law of equality, nonviolence, and religious toleration written on them throughout the empire. He also has roads built that connect the 4 corners of India or northern India where his empire is. And after Asoka's death, you have this massive power struggle, right? He's able to keep the empire together, but after he dies, and you'll see a lot of this in history, when the leader dies, everyone else decides they want to be in charge, right? Much like Alexander the Great's empire collapses after his death, the Mauryan Empire will collapse after Asoka's death. So it's going to break into 3 chunks. For the next 500 years or so, the north is going to be invaded constantly by Greeks, Persians, and Asians invading northern India. Central India is going to constantly be fighting with itself and each other for control. And then if you go to the southern tip of India, of course, the Tamil kingdoms, which were never conquered by the Mauryan Empire, they were by themselves. The southern tip of India, which is controlled by the 3 Tamil kingdoms, they continue to remain independent because nobody conquers the Tamil kings. So, what comes next? After that 500 years of turmoil, you have another strong leader arise to form India's second great empire. This is the Gupta Empire. This is founded by Chandragupta, who is not related to Chandragupta Maurya. So notice Chandragupta, 2 words, no relation to the other Chandragupta. And the new Chandragupta builds up an empire. He came to power by marrying into an influential royal family, and he takes on the title Great King of Kings in 320 AD. So some 500 years after the Mauryan Empire collapses. This includes the city of Magda and the area north of it. It's the central region of the Ganges River, and it is the power basin, his central place of power. Right in 335, so 15 years after he takes on the title, Great King of Kings, Gupta dies. His son takes over. His son is a lover of poetry and music, but also has a warlike side. If you want to have an empire and you want to keep it together, you can like poetry, you can like music, but you also have to be willing to kill people to keep your empire together. So, what was daily life in India like? The Gupta Empire is really the first period from which historians have information on daily life in ancient India. Um, and that was the reason. The reason for that is because they kept very good records. Most folks are living in small villages, right? Merchants and craftspeople are clustered in districts. Shops are on the street level. Homes are in the rooms above. And families are patriarchal. What that means is the household is run by the eldest male. Now, the whole family works in raising crops, but droughts are common. So irrigation is absolutely necessary. In fact, droughts in India are yearly, right? There's a wet season and a dry season. When the wind is blowing in from the sea, it's bringing wet air that hits the Himalayas. You get a lot of rain, and that rain fills up your rivers, and you get water. And then the second half of the year, the wind is coming over the Himalayas where it's been dried out completely. So there's the wet season and the dry season, and it's like clockwork every year. So on to section 2, religions in India. So a more popular form of Buddhism starts springing up by about 2050 BC. Buddhism and Hinduism are India's two main faiths. The Buddha, of course, stresses that each person can reach a state of peace called nirvana. And there are two types of Buddhists. There's the Mahayana Buddhists. They offer salvation to everyone. They allow for popular worship. And then there's the Theravada Buddhists, and they have a much more individualized discipline. So if it's not popular worship, it's not getting together with other people. Theravada Buddhists are very concerned with what are you doing individually to live a disciplined life to reach nirvana. And then we have this rebirth of Hinduism. Now, Hinduism starts changing during this time period. It starts branching off from Buddhism, and a lot of the practices can only be performed by priests. And there are three sort of important gods within the Hindu pantheon, but there are thousands of more gods on top of this, right? So there's Brahma, who is the creator of the world. There's Vishnu, who is the preserver of the world, and there is Shiva, destroyer of the world. And people begin to devote themselves either to Vishnu, the preserver, or Shiva, the destroyer. And I will put a question on the quiz about these three gods. Not any of the other ones, though. And then you have this sort of blooming of Indian culture, right? Literature and the performing arts. Kalidasa is this great poet. He writes Shakuntala. In southern India, they begin to hold writing academies. You have more than 2,000 poems that still exist. Acting groups start traveling through southern India. Women and men are performing in these shows and participating in these shows, not just men as you see in theater and a lot of other places in the world. And a lot of their big discoveries, a lot of the big things that the Gupta Empire pulls off are in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, and we're going to talk about those. So first, they start using a calendar based on the sun rather than on the cycles of the moon. So they're using a solar calendar or a calendar based on the sun. They also break the week down or break down a 7-day week. And then they're breaking each day down into specific hours. They discover that the Earth is round based on the shadow of the moon from a lunar eclipse, which is a pretty impressive way to figure it out. They develop zero for a decimal system. They develop zero. They also develop a decimal system. And they've got medical guides that have classified 1,000 different diseases, 500 different medicinal plants, and not only do they know how to perform surgery, but they are performing plastic surgery or cosmetic surgeries, basically helping to fix injuries or wounds or unsightly scarring, things like that. So really a lot of incredible scientific discoveries, mathematical discoveries from the Gupta Empire. And then this big piece here, which is trade, specifically overland trade between the East and the West, Silk roads or caravan routes that are used by Asian traders, but also by European traders and African traders, right? The Silk roads, while they are generally seen to be in Asia and connecting the Mediterranean to China to India, there are, of course, Europeans who are traveling these roads as well. There are African traders who are traveling these roads as well. And so Indians have learned of these trade routes and they become the middleman and start making massive profits, right? They're connecting Rome to Africa, or Rome, Africa, and China to each other, right? Of course, Rome and Africa are already connected, but Rome and Europe, Africa, Southern Africa, and China are all being connected. These are all big traders with India, and India, situated in that middle place, is really in a spot to make massive profits, trading things back and forth to these other places that they can't get themselves. And here you can see those trade routes that I was talking about with the Silk Road. Really, these massive trade routes that are connecting Europe to China, and Africa to China. Not to mention the coast of Africa, of course, we could trade across the sea to India, and that could trade in as well. So really, these massive overland trades are extremely important. These routes become called the Silk Road, even though there are many more than one road, right? Like this is a trade network, but it's often called the Silk Road, and that is where we're going to stop today. If you have any questions for me, feel free to hit me up during my office hours. That is, 10 and 2 every weekday. Yeah, so let me know. Give me a call or shoot me an email, and we'll answer any questions that you have.